Is your team not performing well? Is morale low and turnover high? Are you falling further behind the competition? I'm here to help. I'm your host, Shani, and this is the Leadership Show, where business strategy and culture finally meet, and we make the long-awaited shift from rhetoric to results. I promise I'm not your typical boring leadership consultant, and I will help you get your shift together. Let's do this. Good afternoon, LeaderShifters. Welcome to another episode of the Leadership Show, where business strategy and culture always meet. I'm your host, Shani, and it is my pleasure today to introduce you to our guest, Bob Burg. Say hello.
Hello, Shani. It's great to be with you.
Thank you. Well, LeaderShifters, I'm going to let Bob tell you his more robust story, but just very quickly, we were introduced because we have a mutual interest in all things leadership, and we both live in South Florida. So as if that weren't enough things to have in common, we thought it would be great to have Bob as a guest on the Leadership Show because he has so many great tools to help us shift in many different ways. In fact, he has shifted in his career from a broadcaster to a salesperson to an author and world-renowned speaker, and currently has 3 books, not one, but 3 books, all with the GoGiver title. And I'll let Bob explain what GoGiver is, but I think you're going to love the concept and the idea. So without further ado, Bob, again, welcome to the show. And let's start off with, let's give LeaderShifters a little bit of a sense of how you got to where you are now.
Well, the quick overview, I guess, is I began as a broadcaster, first in radio and then in television. I was the late night news guy for an ABC affiliate in a very, very small market, which was good because you kind of had to do everything, right?
Yeah, well, that's where all broadcasters get their official starts, right? In very small markets. And then,
Yeah, exactly. And I really wasn't very good at it. I could read the news, but I certainly wasn't a broadcast journalist. And it wasn't long before I wasn't doing news or anything else in TV anymore, other than selling advertising for it. I began going into sales, selling advertising for television and radio, and sold a few other things. And at first it was very difficult for me to sell, only because I had no knowledge of it. I thought it was something I'd be able to just do and that I'd be really good at and so forth. And I found out, no, it's not really that easy if you don't know what you're doing, like anything else, right? It always looks easier from the outside. So Fortunately, after stumbling for about 3 months or so, I was in a bookstore, and this is almost 40 years ago, back when bookstores were mainly known for books, right? As opposed to,
back when you were 5 or 6 years old.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah. And, so I came across the sales section, which I didn't even realize. I knew there was a business section, but I didn't expect there to be a sales section. I didn't know that was a thing, teaching about sales, because the training where I was working, it was negligible at best, let's say. And so I got a couple of books. One was by Tom Hopkins and one was by Zig Ziglar, 2 of the masters of the craft. And I began to read and study and really go through it and practice and do everything. And within a very short period of time, my sales began to go through the roof. And the only difference was that now I had a methodology, right? I had a proven way of doing something. I would call it a system, if you will. Sure. And to this day, I personally define a system as simply the process of predictably achieving a goal based on a logical and specific set of how-to principles, the key being predictability, right? If it's been proven that by doing A, you'll get the desired results of B, then you just need to do A and do A and do A, and eventually you're going to get the desired result of B. So I started really learning and studying sales, and I just loved it. And of course, with sales comes personal development, because really success is an inside job. So I started reading all the classic books, the How to Win Friends and Influence People, the Think and Grow Rich, the As a Man Thinketh, Psycho-Cybernetics, and the Magic of Thinking. I loved it. It was just
7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
That came out a little afterwards. I was still young. You remember, that was back when I first started. But yeah, 7 Habits is one of my favorite books of all time. But yeah, all those books,
Yep.
right, were the gems that I got to learn from. Eventually, I worked my way up to sales manager of a company, and eventually I started teaching others what was working for me, and put together my own twist to a system. And it's been a fun ride. And from there, writing my first book it was simply utilitarian. It was a way to better position myself, get more bookings at higher fees, make myself more desirable to the marketplace of conventions and conferences.
Sure.
And then from there, it kind of grew and so forth.
Right. Okay. And so that very first book was The GoGiver.
No, actually, the
Oh,
very first one, which was back in the mid 90s, was
okay.
called Endless Referrals.
Ah,
Referrals for
right.
everyday contacts into sales. And that was really a book to show salespeople or entrepreneurs, anybody really who was in business, how to cultivate relationships in a way that was very comfortable and very confidence building, both for you, the salesperson, the entrepreneur, and your prospective customers and clients, and be able to really leverage those relationships into sales, but also ongoing endless referral business. And that was really the first one.
Got it. Okay. And so when did you first publish The GoGiver, which is your hallmark?
Yeah. Well, so there'd been a few books in between, and then back around, I'd say 2003 or four, I had the idea because I always loved reading business parables. That's like, it's a short story, and it grips you, and it's kind of on a heart to heart level, and I thought, what if we could take the basic premise of endless referrals, which was that all things being equal, people will do business with and refer business to those people they know, like, and trust, and turn that into a parable. And
100%.
so
Yep.
so I kind of asked myself, what's the essence of that person who's able to build and create and develop those kinds of relationships, both quickly and sustainably? And I said,
Yep.
well, they're always giving. They're giving value to others. They're always focused on bringing value to others, to the marketplace. And so I came up with the title, The Go-Giver, and a very, very sketchy outline, but it wasn't until I asked my friend John David Mann, who I'd never actually met at that time, but he was my editor-in-chief of a magazine I used to write for,
Okay.
and he was such a brilliant writer and editor, and people who in the niche market he worked, we knew he was a genius, a great writer. Now
Hmm.
he's mainstream. He's so sought after as a co-author and ghostwriter. But back then, only a few people really knew who he was. Fortunately, I was one of them. And so I asked John, and when I say asked, I mean I pleaded with John to be the lead writer and storyteller for the Go-Giver. And so
This was before GoGiver influencer. So back
right.
then you
So
were
this is the
begging,
first.
not influencing.
Yeah, right, exactly, right. So this is the first one. And so John, fortunately, decided, he thought there was some potential to it. And then it took a couple of years. It took, I think, 24 or 25 rejections from publishers until we finally found the right publishing partner, which was Portfolio, Penguin Random House, and they've been wonderful. And it came out at the tail end of 2007, so really effectively 2008. So it's been about 10 years since the first guy came out.
Ah, happy 10-year anniversary to that
Thank you
book.
very much.
Yeah. Awesome. I love the fact that it's written in parable. And that's one of the things I wanted to ask you about. Some of my favorite business books are also written in parable. And that's partially because most business books are really fucking dry and boring and preachy, right? But when it's written in parable, we can relate to it more, right? There's real characters. And so I'm just curious, like, what was the difference between writing, sort of a strict, more teacher oriented book versus writing it as more like you would write a work of fiction?
Sure, because all my other books were how-to books.
Yeah.
And, I kind of write as I speak, so they tend to be, I think, more conversational. Although, a lot of books I read are great books that are how-to books. But it's just a different type of book with a parable because it is a story. It's a work
Right.
of fiction, though there's always truths. And a lot of times within the story, and John and I certainly did this with the Go-Giver, we put in things that really happened in our individual lives and businesses into the story,
Mhm.
but it's a different animal,
Yeah.
and it's short, it's to the point, it's so forth. Um, But John, I always say the lead, I always say the lead writer, because really this guy is amazing. So to me, the easy part was the writing, because John was the lead writer.
Okay.
And so,
Yeah.
he's the kind of guy who could sit down and pop out a new one of these every week.
Okay.
I don't know how, but that's how that, he's that kind of genius.
Such a clever title too, because everyone's like, especially in sales, be a go-getter, be a go-getter. And you're saying, no, be a go-giver.
Yeah, well, so we would take that even to another level, because we would say, because it does sound like it's the opposite of a go-getter. And of course, you could take go-getter two ways. You could say a go-getter is someone who's just trying to, or someone who's a person of action, which we like the person of action part. We like a person who's a go-getter, person of action.
Right, but not not in the absence of what you say is important.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. So we would say, be a go-getter, a person of action, and a go-giver, a person whose focus is on bringing value to others. We'd say, don't be a go-taker.
Yes.
Because a go-taker is the person whose their focus is on the take. Their focus is on themselves. They're very I-oriented.
Yep.
And not only is that, we would say this when it comes to being a go-giver, and this would be, I guess, the premise of the entire Go-Giver series, regardless of whether we're talking about entrepreneurship, sales, leadership, influence, what have you, is that shifting your focus, and this is the key, shifting your focus from getting to giving. And when we say giving in this context, we simply mean constantly and consistently providing value to others.
Yeah.
Doing so is not only a more pleasant way of conducting business, it's the most financially profitable way as well. And so, you take this, as you like to say, into a leader shift. Okay. As a leader, the important thing is to understand that no one's following you or going to follow you or want to be part of your mission or goal because it's you, or it's because you want it. It's going to be because it's going to have to tie in to what they want. The greatest influencers, the greatest leaders ask themselves questions. Well, first, they understand what I believe was Dale Carnegie's underlying premise in his classic, How to Win Friends and Influence People. This is where Carnegie wrote, ultimately, people do things for their reasons, not your reasons.
Absolutely.
So the great leader, right, this person who shifts into what real leadership is, they ask themselves questions to check their own direction and making sure they're able to move from an I or me focus to an other focus. So they're going to ask, how does what I'm asking this person to do, how does it align with their goals, with their wants, their needs, their desires? How does what I want this other person to do, how does it align with their values?
Yep. So the cynic might say, and I'm definitely not a cynic, but listen, there's some out there, so I want to see how you would respond to this. The cynic might say, gosh, that sounds an awful lot like manipulation. What's your response to that?
Sure. So you look at influence itself and say, well, what's the definition of influence? Okay. And so we start there so that we can then go to manipulation and see where that comes into play. So influence, by definition, is on a very basic level, is simply the ability to move a person or persons to a desired action, usually within the context of a specific goal. Now, one thing I would say is that that's the definition. It's not necessarily the essence of influence. I believe the essence of influence is pull as opposed to push.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because, you don't hear people, wow, what a great leader. He or she, they have so much push with people. No, they'd say they have a lot of pull, because that's what real influence is.
Yep.
It's an attraction.
Yes.
Great influencers attract people first to themselves and then to their ideas. And again, they do this through focusing on what the other person wants, needs, or desires. So now let's say, is influence just manipulation? No, influence, by the way, it in itself is neither good nor bad. It simply is. It's sort of like gravity. Okay. It's just a principle. It's just a universal law. Right. Is gravity good or bad? Well, gravity is good when it keeps us from floating aimlessly up into space. It's bad when we fall off a 7-story building. So, influence, is it good or bad? Well, influence is simply the ability to move a person or persons to a desired action, right? Is it good or bad? It's good when it's persuasion, which means you're helping a person to make a decision in their best interest as well as yours. It's manipulation when it's all about you and could hurt that other person. I think one of the best, not definitions, but explanations of the difference between persuasion, which is good, and influence, which is very negative, was through a book by Dr. Paul W. Sweats. It was actually published in 1987. And the name of the book was The Art of Talking So That People Will Listen. Though it was much more about listening than it was about talking. And in the book, he wrote, and I'm paraphrasing slightly here, so please forgive me, but he said, manipulation aims at control, not cooperation. It does not consider the good of the other party. It results in a win-lose situation. In complete opposite to this, the persuader always seeks to enhance the self-esteem and the position of the other party. As a result, people respond better because they're treated as responsible, self-directing individuals. I think what it really comes down to is intent.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
a manipulator may not want to hurt you, but if that's what it takes to get their way, well, then they will, because it's all about them. That could never happen with a persuader, because in order for a persuader to feel good about the situation, they've got to know that not only did you also win, but that you feel good about the situation as well. So I think that's the basic difference between the two.
Absolutely. I love that. And I love that you talked about listening as part of that. In fact, listening is one of my signature pieces of leadership development that I do whenever I teach just about any leadership topic. We end up hitting upon leadership. In fact, right before we started the podcast today, I just finished a section on leadership. In fact, LeaderShifters will notice I'm not in my typical office. I'm in a rented condo because I'm here for the week. So not my artwork, just anyone who knows me, not my artwork. Anyway, so taught a whole section today on what it means to be a good listener and how powerful it is. And quote Tony Robbins, and I say, people who ask better questions get better answers. And when you get better answers, you know more about the other person so that you can actually deliver on the value that they're seeking.
Exactly. And they feel heard, they feel listened to. And there's just, there's no way, no better way when you're leading another individual to make them feel part of it, to feel good, to have trust in you, than to genuinely, again, and this is what we're talking about, authentically and genuinely listen to this person and genuinely care about serving them, because as that leader, you're really the head servant.
Yep. Well, and I was going to ask, how is this different than servant leadership? It's funny that you use that word, because that question had popped into my mind before you even used the word servant.
I don't know that it's necessarily different. I think, you can call different things different ways, but I think I've heard people say it's genuine leadership. I've heard people talk about authentic leadership and servant leadership and GoGiver leadership. And I think that while there might be, different nuances that we all teach, I think it all comes down to real leaders know that you're there to serve others.
Yep.
And that's really what it comes down to. And again, it's not just goody two shoes kind of stuff. This is what makes organizations work. And people can tell when you care. Simon Sinek, in his wonderful book, Leaders Eat Last, I loved his definition of trust. Where he said, trust is the biological reaction to the belief that a person has our well-being at heart. And you see this in the bottom line of companies, where the leadership cares about those who are employed with them. They care about their team members, and the team members know this. It's not just a slogan, it's the culture.
100%. That's what, as you know, that's what my entire business premise is about, is that culture matters way more than most leaders think. And it's only recently that C-suite executives are starting to truly pay attention to culture rather than relegate it and pay lip service to it. Because people
Exactly.
can tell when those senior leaders are not walking the talk and see the hypocrisy in it. And then, it's a downward spiral.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
let's actually talk about the most recent book, The GoGiver Influencer, because I think there's some super interesting concepts in there that I'd love for the leadershifters to hear. So you have 5 secrets to genuine influence.
Yeah. It begins with mastering your emotions. The sages asked, who is a mighty person? And answered, that person who can control their emotions and make of an enemy a friend.
Mm,
And that's really where it all begins, because it's only when we're in control of ourselves, control of our emotions, that we're even in a position to take a potentially negative situation or person and turn it into a win for everyone involved.
yep.
And we all know this, and yet how often do we, based on what someone else says or does, do we allow that to kind of push our emotional hot buttons, and we cause ourselves to be annoyed or irritated or impatient or sad or helpless or angry,
Mm-hmm.
say or do something that is totally counterproductive to what we're trying to accomplish.
Yep.
And and the question would be, well, why do we do, if we know better, why do we do that? And the answer is because we're human beings. And
Yeah.
as
Reptile brain.
right. Well, we are emotional creatures.
Mm-hmm.
We'd like to think we're logical, and to a certain extent we are, but we're pretty emotionally driven. We make major decisions based on emotion,
Yep.
and we back up those decisions with logic. So we rationalize, which
Yep.
simply means to tell ourselves rational lies. And we
Yep.
do this to, so we don't have to feel badly about
Yep.
the horrible decision we made or losing control of ourselves or whatever. So
Yep.
it's,
Thank God for confirmation bias.
yeah, right, exactly. And so it's really, and it's not that we're saying you should, deny your emotions or forego your emotions. First, that would be counterproductive, because
Mhm.
that would be going against human nature, right?
Yep.
But there's no reason to. Emotions are a wonderful part of life. They bring us joy. They make life worthwhile.
Right.
No, don't lose your emotions, but just be the master of your emotions, as opposed to your emotions being the master of you. Or as one of my great mentors, Gandhi Scumaci, says, take your emotions along for the ride, but make sure you are driving the car.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're at the wheel. Your emotions are in the passenger seat, safely buckled in. And
Yep.
so when you can control your own emotions and help the other person work effectively within theirs, now your level of influence is about to go sky high.
Awesome. Which brings us to step 2, I'm guessing.
Well, and this is to um, step into the other person's shoes, which sounds kind of trite, because we've all heard that saying, right? Step into their
Yeah.
shoes, and we think, oh, that's pretty easy. But then you think about it, it's really not that easy when you consider that most of us have different sized feet.
That's right.
So, literally, we can't step into their shoes. Figuratively, we can't step into their heads,
That's right. Yeah.
because we're not them. And we come from different belief systems and different upbringings and different ways of looking at the world and different paradigms. But as human beings, we tend to believe that other people see the world basically the same way we see the world, which simply isn't true. And this is why you hear people say things like, oh, nobody would like that. That's not necessarily true. Or, oh, everyone loves someone, this, or I would never treat someone that way. No, you wouldn't. I wouldn't. It's not congruent with our belief systems, but for other people, it's not. So that's why the way to step into another person's shoes goes
Mhm.
back to what you teach so well, and that is to ask questions and then listen.
Yep.
And one of the mentors in the story advised his protege to listen with the back of your neck. So, in other words, don't just listen with your ears. That's the surface
Mm,
listening. That's listening while we're
yeah.
waiting to speak. It's letting someone else get in their 2 cents so that we can get in our 10 cents. Uh, so, listen with your eyes. Listen with your posture. Listen with the back of your neck. In other words, put your entire being into listening to this person,
Hmm.
understanding them. And when you do that, again, as you mentioned earlier, you have so much more knowledge than you now understand. where this person's coming from.
Mm-hmm.
And again, you also develop trust with this person because they know you're listening, that you care.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So master your emotions, step into the other person's shoes. What are the other three?
Yeah, well,
The other three secrets.
there's three more secrets, which of course aren't really secrets because we all know them, but sometimes we just need to be reminded of what we already know, right? And so number three is to set the proper frame.
Okay.
What is a frame? Well, a frame is the foundation from which everything else occurs. May I share my favorite frame story with you?
Yes, please.
And it
I
has
love
nothing to
stories.
do with the business. Nothing to do with business. It was something I saw at a Dunkin' Donuts restaurant about 3 or 4 years ago. One of my
Okay.
favorite places.
Yes.
So there was a little boy, probably about 2.5 years old, a little toddler, who was running around the restaurant when his parents called him back over to their table. So he starts to walk over, and he suddenly takes a spill on the floor. He falls. Now, he didn't hurt himself, you could tell, but you could tell he was shocked, right?
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't in his experience. Now, the first thing he did was what? He looked over at his parents to get their interpretation of the event. What happened. He wanted to know, okay, what happens now? Now, I got to tell you, Shani, and I totally believe this, that had the parents gotten panicky and upset and, oh no, yeah, my poor baby,
Right.
he'd have started to cry.
Yep.
But what the parents did is they just handled it beautifully. They walked over quickly but calmly. They smiled and they applauded and they laughed and said, "Oh, what a good trick! That looks like so much fun!" And immediately the little boy began to laugh. What the parents did is they set a productive frame from which he could operate.
Yeah.
And that's what we need to do.
Absolutely. That is the exact equivalent of shifting mindset. And
Exactly.
and as adults, we have more cognition to choose that versus the parent child. And those parents are setting that kid up for success in that and not training the kid to cry when he takes a fall, literally or figuratively.
Or figuratively, yeah.
Yeah, love it. Oh, so good. Okay. So framing.
Number 4 is to communicate with tact and empathy.
Okay.
My dad has always defined tact as the language of strength. And I've always enjoyed that definition because to me, it takes a lot of strength to not just react to what someone says, okay? To not just send back that quick nasty email because somebody said, or to react on social media, but to be able to respond, to be able to think first, to consider what you're going to say and how you say it, to ask yourself the question, is what I'm about to say going to build this person or tear down this person? Is it going to serve or is it going to harm? Tact is really a way of communicating an idea to someone that they might not ordinarily find agreeable, but to do so in such a way that not only are they not defensive toward you and resistant to your idea, but they're open to you and more accepting of your idea. So tact is very, very important, the way we say something to someone.
Absolutely.
Empathy is simply that the dictionary definition is the identification of or vicarious experiencing of another person's feelings. But again, just like we don't necessarily know what someone's thinking because we come from different worlds, we don't necessarily know how they're feeling. But here's what we can do. We communicate empathy by understanding not necessarily how they feel, but by understanding and communicating that we understand they're feeling something, and that this something is distressful to them, and that we're there to help them work through it.
Yep. Love that. And, as I think about empathy right now, my head actually went not to business, but to natural disasters. And I have friends in the Carolinas who have been prepping for Hurricane Florence, and there's more hurricanes coming up through the Caribbean, and you're down in Florida right now. And I start to think about, I've lived through hurricanes, and that's oddly where my head went when we were talking about that, even though we're talking about sales and leadership.
And I hope they all remember, if they evacuate, to please take your animals. It's very, very important. Do not leave them there. They can die. They can suffer. So
Yes,
let's have empathy toward our four-legged brothers and sisters.
absolutely. As a cat mommy of 2 kitty cats, couldn't agree more. Elena Kramer would absolutely want to be taken to a place of safety if the hurricane was to hit. Okay. And so what's number 5 after tact and empathy?
Well, this is to let go of having to be right. You know, this one can be difficult. It's also very counterintuitive because, well, Bob, you're talking about influence. Aren't we supposed to be right? Well, sure, of course. Do we want to be right? Absolutely. We're going to prepare to be right, but we're going to let go of the attachment to having to be right. And what this does is, rather than make you less influential, it actually makes you more influential. Why? Because when you let go of that attachment to having to be right, you go into learner's mode, and you're able to gather information that you would not be able to if you were suffering from, as you talked about earlier, confirmation bias, which is exactly what it says. You know, you come across some information that confirms your already held belief or bias, and you accept it, but if it doesn't, you ignore it. You can't learn that way. You can't grow that way. And you also are not as influential when you don't let yourself when you don't let yourself let go of having to be right, because people can tell when you're just staying with your position even though you're wrong. Right? So when we open ourselves up to not having to be right or 100% right, that doesn't mean we have to agree with the new information we hear, but we're open to it. We consider it. We ask questions. And, you know, that actually makes us far more influential, again, for the knowledge aspect, but also because when this person understands that they're dealing with someone who is not looking to just be right at all costs, they're not looking to be right by making them wrong. Now they're much more likely to be amenable to learning more. So, you know, so all of this really comes together in a very holistic way that allows us to be a much more powerful influencer, and as such, a much more powerful leader.
Yeah. You know, that last one really hits home for me, because I grew up a perfectionist, a straight A student, and that led to, in adulthood, feeling like I needed to be right all the time, because that's how I had always been rewarded as a kid. Oh, well, you made 100% score on the test, so that means you're right. and therefore that means you're good, and you get rewarded for that. And when you bring that out of the education system and into the real world, it became about being right. And so I got my worth from being right. And I would hold on to that like with tenacity, like a dog, speaking of 4-legged friends. And in the advice that someone gave me early on that really sort of shifted that for me was, would you rather be right or happy? And I was like, oh, yes.
That's right.
And it was when I let go of having to be right all the time. I really first of all, people want to be around me a lot more. So that's for starters.
I struggled through that. By my nature, my inclination is to have to be right, and you know, and I had to really let go of that. Now, and again, that doesn't mean that you let go of, that you forgo your values.
Of course.
Yeah, which you know, but I just want to make sure people know we're not saying, oh, just give in and no, not at all. But what we can do is we can allow our minds to be open, you know, not so big that our brains fall out, but open enough to be able to take in information that we don't necessarily understand or agree with, and at least put it through our thinking process and ask, where could this person have a point? Where might I not be as right as I think and again, we might come to the conclusion that we're totally right.
Yeah.
And so, you know, we have to judge how we're gonna, but what I like to say is that tact and kindness should never be confused with compromise. We can always speak to others tactfully and respectfully without compromising our values.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. So something else that I love from the book, eight words to move somebody to your side of a point of view or an issue
Well,
as part of influence?
yeah, I mean, this is in the context of, let's say you need someone to do something for you that they don't necessarily have to do. Maybe someone from another department in your company, or maybe it's the customer service representative. You're trying to get them to take something back and you don't have the receipt, or it could be anything. Again, going through these 5 steps that we're talking about, but then, and at that point, this person probably is more inclined to want to help. And then the 8 key words that you say that cinch the deal are basically, if you can't do it, I'll definitely understand.
Yep.
Because what you're doing is you're honoring that person. You're letting them know that, yes, I think you can, but you are more important than the thing itself. And if you simply can't, I'll understand. But what you're saying, if you can't do it, I'll definitely understand. And those 8 words are like magic. Now what you can do is pause for a moment and then follow up with the words, if you could, I'd certainly appreciate it.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, 99% of the time, if the person can come through for you, they may not be authorized or to do so or whatever, but if they can, they will come through for you.
Right. Because you know what? It's just about respect and not feeling entitled and not making assumptions that someone is or isn't going to be helpful, or is or isn't going to follow the rules, or is or isn't going to make exceptions. I like that. It really ties back to everything. It ties back to the 5 steps as I look at it, right? So you're not getting upset or angry or irritable, right? You're managing your emotion. You're putting yourself in the other person's shoes, because we've always in our lives been asked to do things that may not be exactly what we're supposed to do. And so if when we're on the other side of that, we're being respectful and being in their shoes, we're setting the frame that, that it's okay, right? We're for that cooperation. It's an empathetic phrase in and of itself. And again, implicit in that statement is there's no need to be right. Yeah.
Exactly.
So
the attachment. Yeah.
Yeah. Good. So
I think 95% of influence is really how you make that person genuinely feel about themselves. And when you can make another person feel genuinely good about themselves, they feel good about you and they feel good about the situation.
Yeah. So let's talk about applying these principles. And if you have any additional hints or even real life success stories where you've seen your principles applied to some of the most heated subjects occupying the airwaves, as a former broadcaster, I'm sure you're still following the news. Where can we apply? How can we apply these principles when we are at polar opposites, say politically or religious? Because I think that's where the rubber meets the road. Yes, it's great if we can get somebody to cooperate in a business setting and so forth. But where this stuff really matters in today's world is to try and quell the global disruption and disrespect and disagreement and lack of communication that we're seeing for all sorts of different reasons.
Well, unfortunately, today's discourse has really devolved, and it's gone from "I'm right, you're wrong" to "I'm right, you're evil."
Yeah.
And we see this on both sides of the political aisle. We see this in person. We see this at family gatherings. We see this at parties or social occasions in real life. And we see it online on Twitter and Facebook and so forth. And you'll often, you take something like Facebook and somebody makes a point, a political point, whatever it happens to be. And someone writes back and says, people like you have no right to live. You're awful people. You're heartless. You don't care about people. You want to ruin this country, blah, 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 blah. And, it's horrible. And if you notice, the person who's been attacked never writes back and says, thank you so much for pointing out the error of my ways. I hadn't thought about it like that before, but now that you put it that way, I renounce everything I've believed for the past, 20 years. And I agree with you. Doesn't happen. So depending upon, let's say someone else, let's say this person makes this point and the person writes back, we'll take that same example. They take out, people like you are heartless. You're the scum of the earth. You have no right to live. You don't care about people. You want to. So what if now you write back, okay, and saying, let's say the person's name was Dave, who wrote that scathing, horrible remark, okay? And now you write something back like, Dave, I appreciate your passion, or I appreciate the passion you have for this. It's obvious that you care about people. Okay, now here's the key phrase you want to use, because what you did is you reset the frame right there, okay? But now what you say is, like you, I want to live in a country where people are able to blah, blah, blah. And now you go to what the same result is that Dave wants, okay? And then you say, I think our biggest disagreement would be only in the way we feel is the most productive way to make that happen. Okay. Yep. So now you've gone to engagement. Now, here's the thing, and let me answer a couple of questions, Blessy, that people might have about this. First, is that person going to respond now in a nice way? Probably not, because someone who makes a comment like that, I've learned on the internet, they are so far gone to one side or the other, either the left or the right or whatever, that you talk about confirmation bias. It's like, don't confuse me with the facts. My mind is already made up. Okay. Yep. But I've also seen when someone's not that far gone, they'll often apologize for what they said and then blah, blah, blah. But that's not as important, and I'll tell you why. Because we think we're the only two in the discussion, but we're not. Because whether it's in real life or whether it's on the internet, there are lots and lots and lots of people who are watching.
Yeah.
Okay. And most people, remember, are not way to the left or way to the right. Most people, bless you, are somewhere in the middle. They're a little to the left, a little to the right. Okay. They don't follow any one dogma that may, whatever. Okay. Yeah. And they can be persuaded. They can be influenced, but here's what they're looking for. Okay. Two things. Second, I'll start with second instead of first. Secondly, they're looking for who has the facts, the information that makes sense. First, more important, is who presents themselves in a way that is palatable, that is kind, that's respectful, okay, that honors the process. Who could I ask a question to without getting my head bitten off?
Yes.
Okay. So when we do this, yeah, we may or may not have a chip, but typically when we persuade another person who totally is not it takes some time, and you have to build a know, like, and trust. You're not going to do it in one conversation, okay? But even for those who are so far gone, you're not going to influence them ever. There are many more people who are watching who can be influenced.
Absolutely. And I think that is a great note to end on, because I think I would like all LeaderShifters to take that away and think about how we can all do more of that, because we are sitting in the seats, LeaderShifters, where we have the ability to influence others. And it's by us acting the right way and delivering the message in a way that other people will be willing to listen to us, and then having the facts. So thank you, Bob, for being on the show today. This has been so informative, and I love the whole concept of the GoGiver and everything that you've done with it, and love the 5 keys that you walked us through for influencing. Every leader shifter is also a leader influencer.
And I love the concept of leadership. I love it.
Thank you. Well, I look forward to further discussions. And again, I thank you for your time today. And LeaderShifters, you know how to find me, Shani at theleadershiftproject.com, and social media. Bob, how can LeaderShifters find you?
They can visit thegogiver.com without the hyphen, thegogiver.com, and they can scroll down the page if they like and get the first couple chapters of any of the books and see if they like it. Then they can always.
Terrific. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, LeaderShifters. I will see you next week. Until then, hugs and kisses. Thank you so much, Bob.
Thank you.